أسعد الله صباحكم بالخير والمسرات، وأهلا وسهلا بكم في مؤتمر إدارة المعرفة الثالث 2012.
إن إدارة المعرفة أصبحت ضرورة في اتخاذ القرار الرشيد، فهي العين التي يبصر بها صانع ومتخذ القرار، فهي تساعد في رفع وتطوير العمليات الاقتصادية والاجتماعية وغيرها. فإدارة المعرفة هي إبداع وتبادل معرفة منتظمة من أجل تحقيق ميزة تنافسية في بيئة العمل. إن هذا المؤتمر لهو فرصة للمسؤولين والإداريين في القطاعين العام والخاص للتعرف على الماضي والحاضر والمستقبل في إدارة المعرفة، والالتقاء مع المسؤولين والقادة والإداريين في القطاعات الحكومية والخاصة.
الحضور الكرام، تأسيساً على الطبيعة المتجددة للمعرفة وفي ضوء المكانة المتميزة التي أولتها حكومة الإمارة لها، كان لزاماً علينا التطوير والتحديث المستمر لقدراتنا وأدواتنا بما يمكننا إلى الوصول إلى أفضل أنماط الإدارة المتميزة لمكتسبات الإمارة المعرفية، ووفقاً لأفضل الممارسات العالمية، وبما يدعم خطة تحول نحو اقتصاد المعرفة المأمول. في هذا الصدد ينبغي الإشارة إلى أن نمط الإدارة الحالي للمحتوى المعرفي في أبو ظبي لا يقتصر على مجرد اكتساب المعرفة وتوظيفها لخدمة الأهداف الاقتصادية والاجتماعية، بل يتعدى ذلك ليشمل تعزيز قدرة الإمارة على توطين المعرفة وتوليدها بهدف تطوير إطار معرفي شامل يمكننا من امتلاك زمام المعرفة وتطويعها لخدمة تحديات التنمية المستدامة.
صنع الثروة مستقبلا كله سيكون من صناعة المعرفة، وبدأت ظواهر ذلك تظهر، فأغنى أغنياء العالم الآن أغلبهم عمال معرفة كما يسميهم بيل غيتس، يقول عن نفسه I am a knowledge worker، أنا عامل معرفة. عامل المعرفة هو الأغنى في هذه الدنيا. وعندما نتكلم عن إدارة المعرفة وعن اقتصاد المعرفة ليس هنالك ما يميزهما إلا بعد واحد، وهو البعد المجتمعي، أي البعد الاقتصادي. فإدارة المعرفة تركز على المؤسسة، واقتصاد المعرفة يركز على دور المؤسسة في المجتمع. وأنا أردت أن أخذ الجانب العملي الآخر تاركا للخبراء الحديث في إدارة المعرفة من الناحية الفنية، سواء كان من حيث تجميع المعلومة أو تبويبها أو تخزينها أو إدارتها أو تطويرها أو استخراجها أو نشرها. وأود أن أطرح تصوراً كنت قد ألقيته حديثاً في محاضرة في جامعة كولومبيا عن مستقبل العالم وأين نحن سائرون، وهو مستقبل يحدده ما نبحثه هذا اليوم، ما نبحثه في مجال إدارة المعرفة لصنع المعرفة ومن معرفة صنع الثروة.
Well, let me now turn to the subject at hand, and I'd like to talk to you about this idea of empowering Arab knowledge workers, particularly in this region, and particularly in how we can come together to create what we're calling the knowledge environment. As many of you know, when you start to study a new discipline, it's very important, I think, to take a look at what's in the literature, to try to find out the sorts of things that have already been written. And what you see on this slide are some of the best books that I think have been written about knowledge management. And as you look at those books, and I realize for some of you in the back it's a little hard for you to see them, but what you'll note is in the center there's a book that some of you might be surprised to see. And it's a book that's over 400 years old. It was written by Sir Francis Bacon. It was a series of his essays called The Advancement of Learning. And I believe that what he wrote 400 years ago remains very relevant today. So one of the messages that I'd like to leave with you as we discuss things today is much of what we're talking about is not new. But there's much that we can learn, and there's many ways that we can do it much better. Now, for those of you that knowledge management might be quite new, I would encourage you to take a look at the 4 books that are in the corners of this slide. I think these are some of the best books, and I think all of you that are involved in this discipline should have those on your desk.
Today, I am going to share with you a case study of knowledge harvesting in South Africa in 2 organizations. One is the government department, and another one is the Medical Research Council of South Africa. I'll be talking on giving you the background, the processes, and the challenges of knowledge harvesting. South Africa is a developing country. We have our own challenges, which I'm not going to talk about here generally. Specifically, I'm going to talk about knowledge management and the challenges that we have in terms of knowledge management. We also have a growing concern within South Africa, and especially within government, in terms of knowledge and experience gathered which is lost. This loss is through resignations, retirements, etc. Lessons identified are not captured at all levels of government, including Parliament. The lessons identified, not learned, because you have learned a lesson if only you have actioned on that lesson. If you haven't actioned the lesson, you have not learned, leading to reinvention of the wheel and the repeated mistakes within government. A study that was conducted by one government department, which is the Department of Public Service Administration, showed evidence of this loss.
The story about rush to collect university data. The government is investing in an initiative to look at the data around the students, etc. So even yesterday, in your local newspaper, they are knowledge stories. How do we leverage the information and data that we have in order to make better quality decisions? And you know, if we make better quality decisions over time, and those decisions are more informed by accurate, reliable data, then we can perform better as a nation or as a company or even as an individual. So knowledge management is happening all the time. We just haven't always called it that. The other thing, it's one thing to know, but it's another thing to actually do. There is no sense in gathering all of this data if you're not using it. As our previous speaker said, we need to harvest it in a way that we can then share it so that people can do something with it. You don't want to lose it, but you just don't want to collect it either. You want to collect it in a way that it can be used by others in a context that makes sense for them. And that was one of the things I enjoyed about the previous speaker, about understanding what to do in what context. Because what works for somebody else does not necessarily work for you. Over the last 3 years, I've been doing a PhD study on the influence of behaviour on knowledge transfer. And we all know that working in projects, you're trying to create something new, but you don't know exactly what's going to come out the other end of that. And until you go through the process, where we end up is slightly different to what we thought we would end up with when we started. Yesterday I went out to the Palm Island, and I don't know whether you know, but there was an Australian engineer working on that, and the tunnel across to the island was not in the original plan. It wasn't until they started sort of a long way down the track and started production, construction I should say, that they realised that the volume of people going through, they needed some bigger way to get more people to and from. Otherwise, there would be traffic problems. So they didn't know that at the beginning, but they learnt it as they went, and then they had to adjust. This is what knowledge management is. We don't always know exactly what the future holds. But the more knowledge that we have, and the more that we talk about that knowledge and how to apply it to our situations, gives us a much better idea of how to get to a better place in the future. So that's what I wanted to talk about, empowering knowledge workers to more accurately share what they know, to more engage with each other, because what you think is important may be different to what I think is important. John and the previous speaker both used the word perspective. What I think is right may not necessarily be right from your point of view or in your context. The way in which to understand that is to engage in conversation. So rather than say, no, you do it my way, you say, explain to me your context and why you think that way is better. So by asking a series of questions, we can see how to more effectively use the knowledge.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you over these 2 days. It's a real honour to be here, my first time in the Middle East. And it's going really well. Or it was going really well until yesterday I managed to lose my cell phone. So if anybody finds an Apple iPhone looking for an owner, I would appreciate that. That would be very good. And I spoke to my daughter last night on Skype, and she said, Dad, I hope you've learnt your lesson, because my daughter is always misplacing her mobile phone. So, now it was my turn. And it got me thinking, I guess, about this whole notion of lessons learned, and the fact that we often use this phrase about learning lessons, and we often use it as a bit of a defense mechanism. So if you were to go onto Google this morning, onto Google News, and type in the phrase lessons learned or lessons learnt, depending on your spelling, and hit return, you would get back a number of news stories from people like Rick Santorum in the US saying why he didn't win the latest round in the presidential candidate runoff. You'd have news items from sportsmen and sports managers about their football team or hockey team and why they didn't win that particular match. You'd have politicians talking about lessons learned from the economic crisis or the banking crisis. You'd have stories about Fukushima and the lessons learned from those tragedies. And everybody's talking about lessons learned. But actually, what do these lessons look like? Where do they exist? Are they in people's heads? Are they written down? What format do they take? I sometimes wonder whether lessons learned are a bit like the Higgs boson particle in theoretical physics, where we know it has to exist because there's a whole load of theories that hang off the fact that this particle exists, but actually no one's ever seen it. And sometimes I think our lessons learned are a bit like that. So it's a popular line for managers, for leaders, for sportsmen and women, for fathers who lose their phones with their children. But sometimes it's really a popular lie, because when it comes to it, as knowledge management professionals, we promise the earth around lessons learned approaches, and sometimes we under-deliver. We don't deliver what we promise because it's much harder. So what are some of the challenges around lessons learned? Let's look at a typical project life cycle and look at some of the steps that we go through. And
I will share with you our experience in implementing knowledge management in a governmental organization, using knowledge management to create a more effective public policy for Egypt. Allow me first to give you a quick overview about our organization. It's a government-affiliated think tank, a public policy research center called the Information and Decision Support Center. It was founded in 1985. We do have more than 355 researchers. Of them, we have some master degree holders, PhD holders. We may call it a multidisciplinary research center because we have a lot of different departments, some political department, an economic department, a public opinion poll center, a future studies center. Our budget is financed by the government. And what distinguished IDSC from the first day was that we do enjoy some institutional code of ethics. This is what distinguishes us from other governmental institutions, and we do have some intellectual independence. We do not only rely on our research team, we do have also some elite of academic professors and retired public officials who helps us as part of our team or as part of our advisory board members. So the objective of IDSC is to support public policies and decisions through solutions for reform and developmental challenges facing Egypt. We also try to disseminate findings and views through some seminars and workshops and conferences in Egypt. And we aim also to create some societal debates on issues relevant to the Egyptian citizens. It's also worth mentioning that at the beginning where IDSC was established, they took a principal role in implementing the internet in Egypt and spreading the computer culture, and so we do enjoy a very strong IT infrastructure in the organization.
My talk will be around 4 main points. This is the headquarters of TUV Rhineland, and this is our building for training and consulting just next to it. Both of them in Cologne, and we have also other centers, for example, in Berlin and all over the world, of course. So the title of my talk is From Information to Knowledge Society. One sees the difference that I insist in making between information and knowledge, and how to design success steps towards a powerful workforce. I would like to talk about 4 major points here about the history of knowledge as history of science. How do we know what we know? About methods of knowledge acquisition, and the 4th point will be from information to knowledge society.
What I want to do in my next sort of 50 minutes or so is a couple of things. I've just given you a brief background to the cafe. I want to share some stories because when I first started to do the cafe, it was purely out of my exasperation with those death by PowerPoint presentations. I wanted to replace them with something more engaging. Over the last 10 years, I've learned that conversation and the cafes can be used in many different ways. They are not just a replacement for these chalk and talk presentations. So I want to share some stories with you, some ways that I've seen organizations take and adapt the cafes and use them in different ways. Then I'd like to step back and look more broadly at the role of conversation in business, because I think conversation, in many ways, is at the heart of what KM is all about.
من توصيات مؤتمركم هذا الذي جمعناها من خلال بعض الإخوان وبعض المتحدثين، أول توصية: لابد من إعطاء أهمية أكبر من قبل الإدارات العليا في منظمات الأعمال لإدارة المعرفة، وتتمثل فيما يلي: استقطاب وتعيين مدراء للمعرفة بحيث يكونوا مؤهلين وقادرين على أداء المعرفة. 2. تدريب وتطوير العاملين في المعرفة ليكونوا عمال المعرفة knowledge worker. تعيين سفراء وسفيرات للمعرفة في المنظمات. 2. تسليط الضوء على اهتمام بالزيادة في تعليم مهارات التفكير في المرحلة الابتدائية والتمهيدية، وتسليط الضوء لتبني الأفكار الابتكارية والإبداعية في المرحلة الثانوية والجامعية في العالم العربي. 3. لابد أن تكون هناك حاضنات أعمال لدعم أصحاب الابتكارات والاختراعات والتسويق لها محليا وعالميا حتى تعود المنفعة على المجتمع. 4. لابد أن يكون هناك مراكز بحوث رائدة للجامعات ومرتبطة بالقطاع الخاص، ويكون هناك التعاون بين القطاع الخاص والقطاع الحكومي من أجل خلق وتكوين الاقتصاد المعرفي. خامساً، أن يكون شعار منظمات الأعمال ابتداء من اليوم تطوير الموجود والتفكير بابتكار الجديد، وذلك بأحدث ما توصلت إليه التقنيات الاتصالات والمعلومات لتكون أدوات من أدوات المعرفة في أيدي موظفيكم. سادساً، لابد من تبني ثقافة نشر المعرفة من خلال تهيئة المجتمع المعرفي مع الأخذ بمتطلبات تكوين المجتمع المعرفي. تعريف المجتمع المعرفي أي ذلك المجتمع الذي يقوم أساساً على نشر المعرفة وإنتاجها وتوظيفها وتطبيقها بكفاءة في جميع مجالات الحياة من أجل الهدف إلى الوصول إلى التنمية المستدامة، وذلك لما لها تأثير على الحالة الاقتصادية والاجتماعية والتي تعتبر أكبر تغيير في الحياة البشرية. سابعاً، البدء في عمل دراسات من القطاعات الأكاديمية على الربط بين إدارة الحكمة وإدارة المعرفة، حيث أن إدارة الحكمة عندما تكون في المؤسسة تكون قيمة مضافة للوصول للذاكرة الاجتماعية والتنظيم من خلال المراسلات والعلاقات طويلة الأجل مع الموظفين. النقطة الأخيرة وهي البدء في التعاون لكي تكون هناك مراكز البحث العربي شريكة في إدارة المعرفة، حيث هناك شبكات عالمية لبحث المعارف تدعى Global Knowledge Worker Researcher، والتي تضمن حاليا 20 بلدا حول العالم، ونتمنى أن تكون هناك بعض الدول العربية. وسمعت من خلال المسؤول عن هذا أن الإمارات تقدمت بالطلب هذا لتكون عضو في هذا التجمع العالمي Global Network Research.
السادة والسيدات، كل الشكر والتقدير لشركة خطوات النجاح للمؤتمرات والندوات على تنظيمها لهذا المؤتمر، مؤتمر إدارة المعرفة الثالث في أبو ظبي. والشكر أيضا موصول للراعي الرسمي دائرة التنمية الاقتصادية وللداعم الاستراتيجي غرفة تجارة وصناعة أبو ظبي، ولكل الرعاة والشركاء الذين ساهموا في إنجاح هذا المؤتمر.